Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Please comment on where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. If there were a world record for the title of The Person Who Can Talk Non-Stop for 30 Minutes Without Breathing, Sophie Turner would definitely win the gold medal. At least that's what Nathan Blackwood thought. After the official speeches, the conference hall moved into the open discussion segment. The host had just invited the guests to share their views when Sophie's sharp voice rang out. Sorry, but I don't think this data is accurate. Actually, from the back rows, people turned their heads. A brunette in a simple blue dress, her bright eyes glittering with challenge. Nathan, seated in the front row, frowned slightly. Here again, the girl who had already interrupted him during his presentation earlier. The problem is, everyone only looks at profit, but readers need emotions too. Who here still loves the smell of old paper and books? Sophie eagerly raised her hand as if she were teaching a class. A few people chuckled. The host looked flustered, but Sophie didn't stop. She went on passionately about reading habits, about the connection between books and people. Every word of hers was like a needle pricking at Nathan's cold composure. He clenched his jaw, leaned over and whispered, "Can you stop talking?" "No, because I have the right." Nathan couldn't take it anymore. He turned fully toward her, his eyes like ice. And then, in a movement so sudden Sophie didn't even have time to react, he leaned down and kissed her. The entire hall fell silent. Sophie's eyes flew wide open, her heart pounding like it was about to leap out of her chest. Her mind went blank except for the sweet, heated taste lingering on her lips. When he pulled away, Nathan said coolly, his deep voice razor-sharp, "Finally?" Silence. Whispers rippled across the hall. Some people gawked. Others tried to stifle their laughter. Sophie's face flamed red and she shouted, "Oh, you're insane!" Sophie Turner had always believed that if a morning began with a good cup of coffee, the whole day would be filled with energy. But today, the universe seemed determined to tease her. The cappuccino she had just bought was still steaming when, in a careless second, it splashed against the shoulder of a man striding quickly through the narrow hallway of the conference center. "Oh my gosh!" Sophie gasped, pulling her hand back in time, but a few drops still landed on the sleeve of that expensive gray suit. The man stopped and turned his head, a face handsome enough to be on the cover of Forbes, but his eyes were cold as ice. Sophie froze for a moment, her heart skipping a beat. "Do you even know how to watch where you're going?" His voice was deep and hard, not loud, but sharp enough to make Sophie feel like a student caught dozing off by a strict teacher. She blinked several times, then her quick wit kicked in. "Excuse me, but you're not the only VIP guest here. It's called a common hall, isn't it? Who told you to stride like you're on a red carpet?" The man frowned. Normally, one glance from him was enough to make subordinates tremble, but this brunette in a simple blue dress, clutching a thick folder, didn't flinch at all. "Coffee," he said flatly as if it were an accusation. "Yes, coffee. And lucky for you, it didn't end up on your face," Sophie shot back, half teasing, half defiant. A few people nearby turned to look. Nathan Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Technologies, the keynote speaker of this year's publishing conference, was rarely challenged to his face, and Sophie Turner had no idea who she had just talked back to. When the program began, Sophie finally realized that the name Nathan Blackwood was the MC's focus as he droned on in his lengthy introduction. The man she had nearly doused with coffee was the keynote speaker. Sophie wanted to sink through the floor, but just as quickly, her stubborn streak made her lift her chin. So what? Half of it was his fault anyway. Nathan stepped onto the stage, the lights catching his neatly combed black hair, every gesture radiating control. His voice carried, deep and sharp as a blade slicing through the air. "We are entering an era where technology dictates everything. Publishing is no exception." The entire hall was silent. People listened, nodding, scribbling notes. Everyone except Sophie. The more she listened, the more her tongue itched. All he talked about were numbers, revenue, and profit. But what about the love of books? The joy of turning crisp pages scented with fresh ink? By the time the open discussion began, Sophie couldn't hold back anymore. "Sorry, but I don't think these figures are accurate," she spoke up. Every head turned toward Sophie's row. The MC faltered, but Nathan was already looking down at her, his dark, cold eyes locked on hers, silently saying, "You again?" Sophie swallowed, but her voice was steady. "You said e-books will completely replace printed books within 10 years. But in reality, book lovers are still attached to the smell of paper, to the feel of holding a book. Profit isn't everything." A murmur spread. A few people smiled. Nathan didn't move, but his gaze cut deep. "Who are you?" he asked curtly. "Sophie Turner, editor." A flicker at his lips, unclear if it was disdain or just reflex. "Editor," he repeated. "Then you must understand the market is what decides. Emotions don't pay the bills." Sophie bit her lip, cold as ice. But that didn't make him right. "Some things can't be priced in money," she replied. "When was the last time you read a book for joy, not profit?" The hall fell silent. Curious eyes turned toward Nathan. For a moment, Sophie thought his face faltered, as if she'd touched a nerve he'd buried. But in an instant, the mask of ice returned. "Good question," he said, voice low and steady, "but pointless." After the discussion, Nathan stepped down, greeted instantly by a flood of people. Sophie was busy gathering her papers when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Do you always like drawing attention in public?" She turned. Nathan stood there, tall, his presence like a shadow cast over her, his face expressionless, but his eyes burned. Sophie pressed her lips together. So this was the powerful CEO trying to put her in her place. "No, I just like telling the truth." "Or are you so afraid of the truth you call it attention-seeking?" Nathan tilted his head slightly. He looked both annoyed and intrigued, a reaction Sophie couldn't quite decipher. "You talk too much," he declared firmly. Sophie laughed softly, her eyes flashing with challenge. "And you talk too little. Maybe that's why the universe arranged for us to bump into each other." Balance. Nathan didn't reply, but as he walked away, the corner of his lips curved so faint even he didn't realize it. That night in her small apartment, Sophie lay on her bed, laughing to herself as she recalled that frozen face. She didn't know why sparring with a man like that felt exciting. Meanwhile, Nathan sat in his vast penthouse staring out at the city lights. In his head, her sharp voice still echoed, "When was the last time you read a book for joy, not profit?" He hated noise, but for some reason, he couldn't forget the girl who had silenced an entire hall with a single question. A week after the book conference, Sophie still couldn't stop grumbling whenever Nathan Blackwood crossed her mind. In her head, the image of that cold, arrogant man, the one who had made her blush in front of a crowd, kept popping up like an irritating ghost. "Arrogant jerk, walking robot. He probably thinks the whole world revolves around balance sheets," Sophie muttered as she typed on her laptop in the cafe near her apartment. She had no idea fate was about to throw them together again sooner than she expected. Blackwood Technologies was the main sponsor of a major ebook launch event. As the editor-in-chief, Sophie had no choice but to attend. The moment she stepped into the luxurious hotel ballroom and saw the massive LED screen flashing the Blackwood logo, her heart skipped in irritation. And of course, Nathan was there. Tall, commanding, in a dark suit, he looked like a man who saw nothing beyond his numbers and reports. "Fine, this time I'll just avoid him. No need to bring more trouble on myself." But that wish vanished quickly. During the discussion session, a guest raised a question about the future of print books in the digital age. Nathan calmly answered in his steady baritone, "The trend is irreversible. We must accept that print books will gradually disappear because new technology is more convenient and efficient." Sophie bit her lip. She had promised herself she would stay quiet, but the way he spoke so final, as if slamming every other door shut, made her blood boil. "Excuse me, but I can't agree," Sophie burst out, rising to her feet, her voice ringing clear. "Print books aren't just products, they're memories, emotions. You can't erase something tied to childhood with a few dry numbers." The room buzzed with whispers. Nathan turned his head, his eyes darkening. "You again," he muttered, low but audible. Unafraid, Sophie kept going. "Do you know how many people still love the smell of a brand new book? Do you know if children still prefer turning real pages to swiping a screen? And Nathan tilted his head, leaned closer, his voice cold and deep. Can you stop talking? No, because I have the right, Sophie shot back, her eyes sparkling even brighter. And at that moment, Nathan lost his patience. He turned fully toward her, one hand lightly gripping her shoulder, pulling her closer. In the stunned silence of the entire ballroom, he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't tender. It was quick, firm, decisive, the only way to force her silence. But just a few seconds were enough to leave everyone speechless. Sophie's eyes flew wide, her whole body frozen. Her heart pounded wildly, heat flooding her cheeks. For a breathless instant, she forgot where she was only aware of the searing warmth on her lips and the masculine scent surrounding her. When Nathan pulled back, his face was cool, as if he'd merely adjusted a microphone. Finally, silence. Whispers rippled across the room. Some gasped, others stifled laughter. The flustered host quickly cleared his throat. Thank you for your input, Miss Turner. Let's move on to the next topic. Sophie reeled. Then, like a jolt of electricity, she sprang to her feet, face blazing red, and shouted, You're insane! Soft laughter broke out, shifting the atmosphere in the hall. Nathan, meanwhile, sat straight-backed, arms folded, his expression calm, almost unbelievably so. Yet inside his chest, his heart hammered in chaos, unlike anything he'd felt before. When the event ended, Sophie hurried to gather her things, avoiding the curious stares. But just as she stepped into the hallway, a deep, familiar voice spoke behind her. You talk too much. She spun around, eyes blazing. You think you have the right to humiliate me in front of everyone? Nathan raised an eyebrow, answering evenly. No, I just wanted quiet, and I got it. Sophie's words stuck in her throat with fury. She took a deep breath, spitting out each syllable. I will never forgive you. Nathan said nothing. He simply held her gaze for a beat longer. And in his eyes, something flickered, neither icy cold nor regretful. Then he turned away, leaving Sophie standing there, her heart torn between outrage and an unfamiliar, unsettling tremor. The hotel lobby gleamed under golden lights. The last guests had already drifted away, leaving only the hollow echo of footsteps in the vast space. Sophie still stood there, her heart pounding against her ribs, fingers clutching her handbag so tightly her knuckles turned white. She glared at the tall figure walking away and shouted, voice trembling with fury, I will never forgive you. Nathan didn't turn back. His strides were firm, his long shadow stretched across the marble floor, cold and arrogant. But inside, her words cut into his pride like a sharp blade. Nathan Blackwood had never been challenged so openly, least of all by a woman. Most people he dealt with chose silence or compliance. But Sophie Turner, small in her simple blue dress, had dared to look him in the eye and vow never to forgive him. Those lips, sharp enough to throw daggers with words, were the same lips that had made him lose control just a week before. That night, back in his penthouse, Nathan sat for hours in the dark. He told himself it was nothing more than a reckless impulse, that the girl wasn't worth a second thought. Yet the harder he tried to forget, the more vividly he remembered. The way she bristled, the fire in her eyes, the defiance woven into every word like a spark igniting the ice inside him. And Nathan knew this wasn't ordinary irritation. This was a challenge his instincts refused to ignore. 3 days later, Sophie discovered the real nightmare. Nathan would be directly overseeing the joint project between Blackwood Technologies and the publishing house where she worked. When she entered the conference room that morning, arms weighed down by thick manuscripts, she froze. At the head of the table sat Nathan, calm and imposing, his sharp gaze scanning each person until it landed on her. For a heartbeat, Sophie swore she could hear a pin drop. We'll be working together for the next 6 months, Nathan said evenly, almost devoid of emotion. Wonderful, Sophie replied sweetly, though her eyes blazed. I've always enjoyed the toughest challenges. And just like that, the room became a battlefield. Nathan criticized the book cover design as being too elaborate, making it difficult to sell in a digital market. Sophie shot back that it reflected the soul of the work. Readers didn't buy books for minimalism, but for emotion. He retorted, emotions don't pay for printing costs. She countered, profit can't buy childhood memories. Their colleagues sat frozen, trying not to laugh. No one had ever dared to argue with Nathan like this, yet Sophie did it naturally, even eagerly. And it didn't stop in the meeting room. They collided in hallways, elevators, and even at the cafe near the office. Once, while Sophie was waiting in line for a latte, a deep voice came from behind her. Let's hope you don't spill coffee on me again this time. She spun around, snapping, let's hope you actually know how to stand in line properly, instead of strutting like it's a red carpet. He raised an eyebrow, half smirking, half taunting. At least you remember me. Sophie nearly choked on her latte. In the cramped elevator, with only the two of them, the air was so taut she could hear her own heartbeat. Sophie crossed her arms, eyes glued to the glowing numbers above, refusing to look his way. Nathan's voice broke the silence, slow and steady. Are you really planning to never forgive me for the rest of your life? She snapped her head around, eyes blazing. Yes, I told you I never will. He nodded lightly, the corner of his lips curving faintly. Then I suppose we'll be seeing each other quite a lot. Every time Sophie walked away with her face burning, she cursed herself for the quickened beat of her heart. She hated Nathan's arrogance, hated that kiss that had humiliated her, hated his endless teasing. But what she hated most was the creeping realization that she had started to look forward to their clashes. And Nathan, so accustomed to obedience, found himself more and more intrigued by this tiny adversary. Every retort, every spark in her eyes, every movement of those lips reminded him of the moment they had met in the most dangerous way possible. He had never let anyone get that close before. But Sophie had forced her way in. Worse, he didn't want to push her out. And so, an endless battle began between them. Not a single encounter passed without turning into a duel of words. To outsiders, they must have looked like sworn enemies. But both of them knew the truth. Behind those verbal arrows lay something more dangerous, more intoxicating, something taking root in their hearts. And in this war, the real loser wouldn't be the one silenced in debate. It would be the one who fell first. That morning, Sophie walked into the office in a foul mood. She had barely set down her bag when her manager called her into the meeting room. On the table lay a brand new, impossibly thick file. One glance was enough for Sophie to know this wasn't just any project. Turner, congratulations. You'll be the lead editor for Julian Hart's new novel. Sophie froze. Julian Hart is a best-selling author and a shining star in contemporary literature. Being chosen as his lead editor was like being handed a golden ticket. But the thrill had barely registered when her manager added the sentence that made her stomach drop. This project is being directly funded by Blackwood Technologies, which means you'll be working closely with their team, and, of course, with Nathan Blackwood himself. It felt like swallowing a rock. Her heart lurched, the forced smile on her lips stiffening instantly. Every fiber of her being wanted to scream, "No way!" But reason reminded her she had no right to refuse. This was a career-changing opportunity, and also a trap tying her to the man she despised most. That afternoon, Sophie walked into the project kickoff meeting. Nathan was already there, seated at the center, crisp white shirt, dark tie, his eyes cold as if nothing in the world could stir him. The moment their gazes met, Sophie jerked her eyes away, her heart racing out of control. Throughout the meeting, Nathan spoke little, focusing only on figures and timelines. Whenever Sophie presented, he listened in silence, occasionally asking sharp, cutting questions. She knew he was testing her, and she had no intention of backing down. The pacing at the beginning is too slow, Nathan said, eyes never leaving the manuscript. That's intentional, Sophie shot back instantly. Julian builds atmosphere and character gradually so readers have time to connect. Readers today aren't that patient. Then it's my job to make them patient. Otherwise, we'd just be churning out cheap formulaic books. The room fell silent. A few anxious glances flicked around, but Nathan only arched a brow, the faintest curve at his lips, and gave a small nod. Fine. Let's see if you can. Sophie gripped her pen, her cheeks burning. She hated that subtle challenge in his tone, but she couldn't deny the strange heat rising in her chest at the brief spark she'd glimpsed in his eyes. In the days that followed, they were forced to work together almost daily. Nathan often arrived early, sitting with neatly marked documents already spread before him. Sophie would show up with a manuscript full of handwritten notes, her trusty red pen, and her ever-present coffee. Whenever they began exchanging ideas, the tension in the room snapped taut like a drawn bowstring. But the more they debated, the more Nathan found himself intrigued. This woman was unlike anyone he'd ever met. Instead of shrinking from his authority, she met him head-on, her eyes alight, her wit sharp, her arguments so fiery he had to restrain himself from laughing. And Sophie, though, still annoyed, couldn't deny Nathan's lethal magnetism. The way he focused while reading, his strong hands turning the pages, those deep, dark eyes that seemed to see through every defense she tried to put up. All of it made her heartbeat stutter. Each time he leaned in to point out a line in the manuscript, his warm breath brushed her cheek, sending an involuntary shiver through her as she fought the urge to step back. One late evening, they were the only two left in the room. Outside the glass windows, the city glittered with lights. Sophie was struggling with a stubborn paragraph when Nathan spoke, his voice lower, rougher than usual. "You're not like the other editors I've worked with." Sophie looked up, meeting his gaze. Her heart skipped, but she quickly laughed to mask it. "Let me guess. They agreed with everything you said?" Nathan tilted his head slightly. "Most of them, yes." "Too bad. I'm not that kind of person." "That's very clear." His reply was short, but something glimmered strangely in his eyes. Sophie bent back over the manuscript, but her thoughts were in turmoil. Why did it feel as if an invisible thread had stretched taut between them, charged with conflict, yet sparking with something else too? Something dangerous, something hard to resist. When they left the office that night, Sophie swore to herself she would never let Nathan Blackwood pull her into his orbit. But as she walked beside him, the streetlights casting golden light across his sharp features, her heart betrayed her reason once again. That night the office was nearly deserted. Most of the floors had gone dark, leaving only a dim golden glow spilling from the meeting room at the end of the hall. Sophie sat hunched over a pile of manuscripts, her brown hair in disarray, her red pen scratching line after line across the pages. Beside her, Nathan remained upright, his jacket draped over the chair, tie loosened, pencil in hand as he marked each line with meticulous precision. The silence was broken only by the rustle of paper and the ticking of the wall clock. "This section doesn't work," Nathan said, his voice steady but cutting. "The pace is too slow, readers will put it down." Sophie's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "It's intentional, Nathan." Hart wanted to create pauses, space for the characters to breathe. Readers don't always need to be dragged at full speed. "But the market isn't patient," he countered, his gaze still fixed on the text. Sophie bit her lip, heat rising to her cheeks. She was exhausted after a long day, and his relentless nitpicking was the final drop that overflowed the glass. "What do you know about patience?" she burst out, slamming her hand on the table, her voice trembling with fury. "All you ever see are numbers and profits. You never understand that a story needs a heart more than a calculator. If you want a soulless book, go ahead and have an algorithm write it." Nathan lifted his head, his deep dark eyes locked onto hers unblinking. For a moment the air seemed to vanish from the room. Sophie drew a sharp breath, chest heaving. She had gone too far, but pride wouldn't let her take it back. Meeting his gaze head on, she threw down the gauntlet. "If you think I'm wrong, prove it. Don't just sit there criticizing." For a heartbeat, Nathan said nothing. Then he rose, circling the table, closing the space between them. His tall frame loomed over Sophie, pressing her back against the chair. "You really don't know when to stop, do you?" he murmured, his voice low and dangerous. "That's right. And I won't." Sophie's words died in her throat as Nathan's hands gripped her shoulders and pulled her into a kiss. Unlike the first, this wasn't to shut her up. It was fierce, consuming like a fire he had stifled all week, finally breaking loose. His lips crashed onto hers, hot, demanding, stealing her breath with raw urgency. Sophie froze. She should shove him away and slap him immediately. But for a few treacherous seconds, her body betrayed her. Her trembling lips responded, her heart thundering, her chest ready to burst. The smoky scent of cedar wrapped around her, dizzying her senses. Then reason snapped her back. She shoved him hard, breaking the kiss, gasping, her flushed cheeks trembling. You! Her voice faltered, her hand trembling. Then smack! A sharp slap cracked through the silent room. Nathan stilled, his face turning slightly from the force. The air thickened, heavy enough to hear a pin drop. Sophie shot to her feet, heart pounding wildly, her voice shaking with emotion. Don't you ever do that again. Clutching the manuscript to her chest, she spun on her heel, her footsteps echoing fiercely down the corridor. Nathan remained where he was, his hand brushing his stung cheek. He wasn't angry. Instead, a conflicted smile tugged at his lips. Because even through the sting of the slap, he could still taste the lingering sweetness on his mouth. And he knew then Sophie Turner was no longer just an unwilling colleague. She was the only battle that had made his heart race in longer than he could remember. The second kiss had erupted not as an accident, not as control, but as an irresistible blaze. Sophie, shaken, let her heart betray her reason before slapping him to draw the line. And Nathan, quietly accepting the blow, realized he was already falling deeper into the very war he thought he could control. Sophie let out a long sigh as she stepped out of the elevator, arms weighed down with grocery bags after a long day. All she wanted was to sink into her sofa, put on some cheesy romance movie, and forget every single problem connected to Nathan Blackwood. But fate, as always, loved to mock her. Just as she slid the key into her apartment door, the door across the hall opened. Out stepped a tall figure, Nathan Blackwood. In a plain white shirt and black slacks, no tie, he looked far more casual than usual, but his eyes were still just as sharp. He stopped, noticing Sophie frozen in place, then raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing here?" Nathan asked in that calm, low voice, as if the entire building were his by right. Sophie's eyes widened. "This is my home. I should be the one asking what you're doing here." Nathan lifted the grocery bag in his hand. "I just moved in." Sophie froze for several seconds, then nearly shouted, "Don't tell me! Right across from my apartment?" He glanced at the door behind her, the corner of his lips curving faintly. "Quite the coincidence." "No, this isn't a coincidence. This is a nightmare." Sophie planted her hands on her hips, voice dripping with suspicion. "Are you stalking me?" Nathan's brow arched, his face perfectly calm. "Do you really think you're that important?" Sophie's cheeks flushed hot. "You!" She wanted to fire back, but her tongue tangled with her temper. In the end, she just let out a sharp breath, stomped into her apartment, and slammed the door shut. From across the hall, Nathan stood still for a moment. The silence after the slam echoed, but the faint curve of his lips and the glimmer of amusement in his eyes lingered. The next morning, Sophie stepped out onto her balcony to water her small row of plants, only to look up and see Nathan standing on the opposite balcony, coffee cup in hand. He looked straight across at her and gave a small nod as if greeting her politely. "Perfect," Sophie muttered under her breath, tightening her grip on the watering can. "Now even the balcony isn't safe anymore." "At least you're watering them properly this time," Nathan called over, tone utterly casual. "Yesterday I saw you spill half the water on the floor." Sophie's head shot up. "Were you spying on me?" "No, I just have good eyesight." "That's awful. I'd rather plant trees in the Sahara Desert than be watched by a nosy neighbor like you." Nathan sipped his coffee, unbothered. "Your plants would die in 2 days in the Sahara." "You!" Sophie choked, slammed the watering can onto the balcony table, and stormed back inside, muttering, "World's most annoying neighbor." In the days that followed, their fated clash only grew worse. In the mornings, Sophie would rush to catch the elevator, only to find Nathan already inside, leaning against the wall with his phone in hand. When she stepped in, his eyes flicked briefly to her. "Are you actually going down to the parking garage or just standing here to block the way?" she asked with a sharp edge. "Both," Nathan replied simply. The door slid shut. The air thickened. Sophie crossed her arms, staring straight ahead, but her heart pounded irregularly. When they reached the bottom, she flicked her hair and stepped out first, tossing over her shoulder. "Enjoy another day buried in lifeless numbers." Nathan followed silently, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. In the evenings, when Sophie carried her trash out into the hall, Nathan often stepped out at the same time, trash bag in hand. They would stop, facing off like opponents, neither willing to move first. "You go ahead," Sophie snapped. "No, you first. You're the new neighbor. You should show some courtesy. And you're the chattiest person in this entire building. You should try being quiet for once." Sophie ground her teeth, then lifted her chin. "Fine, I'll go. But don't think it's because of you." She stomped toward the elevator, heels clicking sharply against the floor. Nathan followed at a steady pace, trash bag in hand, his eyes glinting with an amusement he didn't bother to hide. For Sophie, having Nathan right across the hall was nothing short of torture. But for Nathan, it was different. He was used to silence, to the cold stillness of a life filled only with work and numbers. His new apartment had always been just a place to sleep. But since Sophie had swept in like a small storm, each day carried a spark of unpredictability. She was fussy, irritable, and always trying to get under his skin. Yet the way her eyes lit up during an argument, the proud set of her lips when she defied him, it fascinated Nathan. For the first time in years, life didn't feel so monotonous anymore. The little downtown bar glowed with golden lights, music thumping cheerfully amidst waves of chatter and laughter. Sophie sat at a long table tucked into a corner, surrounded by friends. She hadn't planned to come, but Julia, her best friend from college, had begged too earnestly for her to refuse. "You have to come," Julia had insisted over the phone. "This time, I've got the perfect guy for you. Sophie, you can't stay single forever." The word blind date was enough to make Sophie groan. And sure enough, the moment she sat down, her friends pounced. "This is Ryan," one of them introduced, pushing a tall, brown-haired man into the seat beside her. "He works in finance." "Perfect for you." Sophie forced a polite smile. Ryan seemed pleasant enough, but the collective scrutiny of the group made her feel suffocated. The last thing she needed was another man to complicate her life, especially after everything with Nathan. "Actually," Sophie drew a breath, searching for an escape, "I already have a boyfriend." The table erupted. Julia's jaw dropped. "What? You never told us." "Well, it's new," Sophie said with a stiff smile, heart racing as she realized she had just dug her own grave. Friends leaned in, firing questions, while Ryan politely shrugged and backed off. The door swung open, and Sophie's stomach plummeted. Nathan Blackwood walked in. In a dark shirt, tie undone, he looked more casual than usual, but still carried that commanding presence that made the room subtly still. Sophie froze. "Why is he here?" Before she could react, Julia waved excitedly and shouted, "Sophie, is that your boyfriend?" Every eye in the bar turned toward Nathan. Sophie wanted to slide under the table, but Nathan was already striding over, his dark gaze locking on hers, a knowing smirk tugging at his lips. He placed a hand on her shoulder, leaned down, and said smoothly, "Yes, I'm her boyfriend." The table erupted again, cheers and squeals filling the air. Julia practically screamed. Sophie, meanwhile, sat frozen, caught between mortification and rage. But Nathan slid into the seat beside her, his arm draped casually over the back of her chair, looking so natural that no one doubted him. "What are you doing here?" Sophie hissed under her breath. "Call it coincidence," Nathan murmured, his eyes glinting. "Or maybe fate." Sophie wanted to kick him under the table, but with so many eyes on them, she could only force a thin smile. The rest of the evening, Nathan played his role flawlessly. He answered her friends' questions with practiced ease, as though he really had known Sophie for years. Every so often, he leaned in to whisper something that made the table laugh, leaving Sophie biting her lip to keep from snapping back. The climax came when Julia chirped, "If you're really dating, you wouldn't mind a kiss, right?" Sophie nearly choked. "Julia!" But Nathan didn't flinch. He turned to her, his dark eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, the noise faded, and Sophie felt her heartbeat trip over itself. Frozen, she couldn't move. And then, to the sound of her friends cheering, Nathan leaned in and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was brief, just a lingering touch. Yet Sophie felt the warmth, the steadiness, and the undeniable truth that it didn't feel staged at all. The table erupted in applause. Oh my God, they're a real couple. Sophie's face burned scarlet, torn between embarrassment and confusion. She couldn't deny the way her heart had stumbled, and Nathan's eyes, when he pulled back, held nothing of a man playing pretend. Leaning close, his breath brushed her ear as he whispered, low enough only for her, "You're good at acting, but this time I'm not so sure I am." A shiver ran down Sophie's spine. She quickly turned away, downing her glass of wine to hide her flaming cheeks. But inside, she knew what began, as a joke had just become something far more dangerous. Ever since that night at the bar, something had shifted between Sophie and Nathan. They still sparred whenever they crossed paths, but behind every glance, every gesture, there seemed to be another layer of meaning. Sophie hated to admit it, but every time she remembered the moment Nathan kissed her in front of her friends, her heart raced. The kiss had been brief, yet so real that she couldn't bring herself to call it pretend. One evening, Sophie came home late after work. Stepping into the elevator, she wasn't surprised to see Nathan already there. He wore a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, the top two buttons undone. He looked tired, yet somehow even more irresistible. "Long day?" he asked, his voice deep but gentler than usual. Sophie gave a small nod, leaning against the wall. "Yeah, what about you? Don't CEOs spend all their time buried in endless meetings and contracts?" "True, but today didn't feel so bad." He tilted his head, his eyes drifting toward her face. Flustered, Sophie quickly turned away. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped into the hall side by side. Standing in front of her door, Sophie suddenly blurted out, "Thanks for the other night." Nathan arched an eyebrow. "For what?" "The kiss?" "No!" Sophie's cheeks flared, her voice higher than usual. "I meant for helping me get out of that ridiculous setup." A rare smile tugged at his lips. "Oh, so you can say thank you." Sophie shot him a glare before slamming her door shut, but her heart wouldn't stop pounding. In the days that followed, between their usual arguments, gentler moments began to creep in. One morning, the elevator malfunctioned, trapping them in the small space. At first, Sophie panicked, pressing the buttons repeatedly. Nathan leaned casually against the wall, switching on the flashlight on his phone. "Do you always panic this easily?" he asked. "Do you think I like being stuck in here with you?" She shot back, her voice trembling. Nathan exhaled softly, then surprised her by admitting, "When I was a kid, I got stuck in an elevator for 3 hours. Alone. Ever since, I've never liked closed spaces." Sophie stilled, turning to look at him under the faint glow of the light. For the first time, she saw another side of Nathan, not the cold CEO, but a man with scars and fears of his own. Quietly, she said, "Well, this time you're not alone." Nathan's gaze shifted to hers. In that moment, the world seemed to pause, leaving only the sound of two hearts beating in the silence. When the elevator finally whirred back to life and the doors opened, they stepped out without a word. But Sophie knew her heart had skipped a beat. The following night, Sophie stood on her balcony with a glass of wine in hand. The city lights shimmered, the night breeze cool against her skin. Across the way, Nathan leaned against his own railing, whiskey glass in hand. "Seems like you've got more free time than I thought," Sophie teased. "Or maybe I just have different ways of unwinding," he replied, "like watching my noisy neighbor." Sophie pursed her lips, though she couldn't hide a smile. "If I bother you so much, you can always move somewhere else." "No," Nathan said with a slow shake of his head, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm getting used to it. In fact, I think I might even enjoy it." Heat rushed to Sophie's cheeks. She turned away quickly, pretending to fuss with her wineglass. But her heart betrayed her, hammering hard against her chest. From then on, their clashes began to blur with moments of sweetness. Nathan, once so closed off, found himself drawn to Sophie's radiant smile and her sharp, endlessly talking, yet strangely captivating lips. And Sophie, though she tried to deny, it couldn't ignore that behind the icy mask of a CEO was a man learning, step by step, how to open his heart. Neither was ready to admit it. They still hid behind arguments and teasing, but their hearts were already out of step, skipping beats they couldn't control. And both knew it was only a matter of time before this game spun out of their control. Friday night, after a long and exhausting week, Sophie finally gave in to dinner plans with Liam, her easygoing colleague from the editorial department. Liam was the kind of man anyone could relax around. Friendly, funny, always ready to listen. To Sophie, he was safe a space where she didn't have to brace herself against sharp remarks or cold stares. The little Italian restaurant on the corner glowed warmly, filled with the smell of fresh pizza and red wine. Sophie wore a beige knit dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, her smile lighter than it had been in days. Sitting across from her, Liam kept her laughing with silly office anecdotes, his charm effortless. It was at that exact moment, Sophie tilting her head back, eyes sparkling under the candlelight, that a tall figure appeared at the door. Nathan Blackwood. He stood still, dark eyes stormy as they locked onto the sight before him. Sophie smiling, but not at him. For a heartbeat, Nathan was no longer the composed CEO who controlled everything. He was just a man, seized by raw, primal jealousy. He strode forward. Liam looked up, startled to see such a recognizable figure in their modest restaurant. Sophie nearly dropped her glass. "Nathan, what are you doing here?" Her voice cracked with shock. "Coincidence," Nathan said smoothly, though his darkened eyes betrayed him. "I was passing by and found it interesting." Liam stood politely, offering a hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Blackwood." "I'm Liam, Sophie's colleague." Nathan shook at his grip just a little too firm, leaving Liam momentarily thrown. Then, without invitation, Nathan slid into the empty seat right beside Sophie, his ease so absolute it was maddening. "You do realize this is my dinner?" Sophie hissed under her breath. "Ours," Nathan corrected, voice low and sharp. "You're the lead editor on a project I'm funding. That makes every dinner potentially business." Sophie nearly choked. "You're insane!" Liam glanced between them, puzzled but polite. He tried to lighten the mood, but Nathan had already picked up the menu and placed an order. A glass of the same wine she's having, and a medium-rare steak. Sophie sat rigid, cheeks burning in fury. This was a blatant intrusion. But beneath the anger, her heart thudded with an unsettling thought. Was he jealous? The meal passed in strange tension. Liam kept the conversation going, but Nathan frequently interrupted, tossing sharp remarks at Sophie. When Liam praised her for staying calm in tense meetings, Nathan interrupted. "Calm? I'd call her too loud." Sophie growled under her breath, kicking his shin beneath the table. Nathan didn't even flinch. Instead, he leaned closer, murmuring near her ear, "The angrier you get, the cuter you are." Sophie flushed crimson, biting down hard on her tongue. Liam, sensing something unspoken between them, gave a courteous smile and excused himself early. The moment Liam left, Sophie whipped toward Nathan, voice blazing. "Do you realize what you just did? You ruined my evening." Nathan leaned back, eyes sharp but glimmering with something he couldn't quite mask. "Your evening? Or the evening where you smiled like that at another man, while I—" He cut himself off, jaw tightening. Sophie blinked, stunned. "Are you jealous?" The question slipped out and hung there. Both froze. Nathan's silence lasted only a beat before he stood, circling the table, taking Sophie's wrist in his hand. "What are you doing?" she gasped as he pulled her into a quiet corner of the hallway. Nathan pressed her lightly against the wall, his voice hoarse, raw. "You drive me insane, Sophie. Every time I see you smile at someone else, I can't stand it." Her lips parted, her pulse racing wildly. She wanted to argue, but his dark, relentless eyes swallowed her words. And then, without warning, Nathan kissed her. This kiss wasn't about control. It was desperate, consuming, as if he feared losing her to someone else. His lips crashed onto hers, hot, fierce, claiming her breath and silencing all resistance. Sophie struggled for a heartbeat, but her body betrayed her, melting into his arms, lost in the heat of his mouth and the wild rhythm of his heart. When Nathan finally pulled back, Sophie was trembling, cheeks flushed, lips damp. His breath was ragged as he whispered against her skin, "Don't let me see you with another man again." Dazed, Sophie's eyes flashed with defiance. "You don't get to control me." Nathan paused, gazing at her deeply, Then his lips curved into that crooked smile. Maybe not, but my heart doesn't listen. Sophie turned away, hiding the spark burning in her eyes. Inside, her feelings swirled chaotically, anger, confusion, and something dangerously sweet. Because for the first time, she knew without doubt, Nathan Blackwood, the cold, untouchable CEO, truly cared for her. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us at Soul Stories, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. That weekend, Sophie had to stop by Blackwood Technologies to finalize some project documents. The building was quieter than usual. The top floor was nearly deserted, and her footsteps echoed down the hall. As she searched for the storage room, she caught the faint voices of two employees chatting nearby. Can you believe it? It's still about that time Nathan almost got married and was betrayed. Yeah, his fiancée ran off with his business partner right before the engagement. That's when he became so cold. The whispers ended abruptly when they noticed Sophie standing close by. She froze, her heart thudding. She had never imagined Nathan carrying such a past. He always seemed untouchable, arrogant, cold, as if nothing could ever reach him. But now she realized there was a wound hidden beneath the ice, one he had never let anyone see. That evening, back at her apartment, Sophie noticed the light still glowing from the balcony opposite hers. Nathan stood there, glass of whiskey in hand, his gaze lost in the city skyline. In that moment, he didn't look like the powerful CEO she sparred with, but like a solitary man haunted by memories no one wanted to revisit. Hesitating, Sophie picked up her mug of tea and stepped out onto her balcony. "Can't sleep?" she asked gently. Nathan turned, surprise flickering in his eyes at her initiating the conversation. "No, some nights I stay up late. Thinking about the past?" The words slipped out before Sophie could stop herself. She bit her lip, worried she'd gone too far. But Nathan's expression only darkened slightly. He wasn't angry. He set his glass down, his eyes locking onto hers. "What exactly did you hear?" "I overheard a little," Sophie admitted. "I wasn't trying to pry, but—" She drew in a breath. "I understand why you hide your feelings. And I'm not here to laugh at you or pity you. Everyone carries scars of their own." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crisp autumn wind. Nathan studied her face under the warm balcony light, her eyes steady, sincere, so genuine that his icy armor cracked. "You know," he said quietly, his deep voice carrying the faintest tremor, "I once believed in absolute love. I was ready to give everything. And then the person I trusted most walked away on the eve of what was supposed to be our new life. She left with my business partner, and with her went more than just trust. She left a reminder that love is nothing but a cruel game." Sophie listened in silence, her heartbeat slowing with every word. For the first time, she didn't see Nathan Blackwood as an untouchable wall of ice, but as a man scarred, still bleeding from invisible wounds. "That's why you don't believe in love," she whispered. Nathan gave a slow nod, his gaze shadowed. "I built walls so no one would ever have the chance to hurt me again." Her fingers tightened around the balcony rail, her throat thick. Yet what she felt wasn't weakness in him, it was strength, the strength to survive after being broken. "You have the right to keep your distance," she said softly, "but you also have the right to open your heart when you meet the right person. Scars don't make you weaker, Nathan. They're proof of how strong you've been to endure." Nathan searched her face as if hunting for pity or false sympathy, but all he found was unwavering warmth in her brown eyes. Something tightened in his chest. For the first time in years, he didn't feel judged, he felt understood. "You're strange, Sophie Turner," he murmured. Sophie smiled faintly. "And you, Nathan Blackwood, you're just very good at hiding." No more words were needed, just two balconies, two people once bound as adversaries, now quietly sharing a secret. Between them stretched a new thread woven from understanding, respect, and something deeper neither dared to name. When Sophie finally stepped back inside, her heart was still trembling. She didn't know what the future held, only that from tonight on, Nathan no longer looked like just a cold CEO. He was a man with scars, learning to trust again. Nathan stayed outside much longer, eyes fixed on Sophie's now dark window. A strange feeling stirred within him, someone had touched his deepest wound, And instead of pain, he felt lighter. And he knew then, Sophie Turner was becoming the one exception who could break through the walls he had built all these years. That afternoon, Sophie carried a thick stack of manuscripts into Blackwood Technologies. The top floor was as cold and quiet as ever, just like its owner. But today, as she stepped out of the elevator, the sound of light, lilting laughter echoed down the hall. The sound made her stop in her tracks. Near the reception lounge, Nathan was standing. Beside him was a tall, striking blonde in a sleek dress that clung to her elegant frame. Sophie didn't need an introduction, she knew immediately. Eleanor Moore, his former fiancée, the woman who had left him for his business partner, carving a wound that had never quite healed. Sophie held her breath, watching. Eleanor had her hand pressed against Nathan's chest, smiling sweetly. Nathan frowned, subtly trying to pull back. But before he could step away, Eleanor wrapped her arms around him. The embrace was intimate and familiar, as if the years of distance had never existed. Sophie's heart clenched. "Nathan," Eleanor whispered loud enough for Sophie to hear. "I know I made a mistake. I've regretted it every single day. I want to start over." Nathan's jaw tightened, his hand lifting to remove hers. But in that exact moment, Sophie appeared in the doorway. Her eyes widened, her chest constricting as Elena leaned up and pressed a kiss to Nathan's cheek. Sweet, perfect enough to make anyone watching believe they still belonged together. Nathan froze, caught off guard. And then Sophie's voice cut through, sharp and ice cold, even startling herself. "Sorry to interrupt. I must have come at the wrong time." "Sophie!" Nathan turned quickly, but she had already spun away, her footsteps burning down the hall like fire beneath her heels. That night, Sophie sat in her apartment, staring blankly at the pile of manuscripts. Over and over, the image replayed in her mind. Elena in Nathan's arms, whispering promises, kissing his cheek, and Nathan not pushing her away fast enough. It was all the proof she needed. Everything he'd ever said was a lie. She was nothing more than a distraction, a pastime. A knock rattled her door. Sophie jumped to her feet, already knowing who it was. She opened it to find Nathan, his face taut with urgency. "We need to talk." His voice was rough, frayed. "There's nothing to say," Sophie snapped, starting to shut the door. But Nathan gripped the handle. "Sophie, what you saw wasn't what you thought." "Elena." "Don't say her name," Sophie cried, her eyes burning. "I saw enough. You let her hold you. You let her kiss you. You just stood there like you were still waiting for her to come back." "No!" Nathan's voice cracked, raw with desperation. "I don't feel anything for Elena anymore." "I was caught off guard. I didn't have time." "Didn't have time to push her away?" Sophie cut in bitterly. "Stop making excuses, Nathan. What do you take me for? Just some distraction while you're still trapped in the past?" Nathan stepped closer, his voice breaking. "You're not a distraction. Sophie, you matter to me." "Matter?" She laughed bitterly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "One glimpse of Elena, and suddenly everything you said means nothing. You're still chained to your past, Nathan, and I won't be anyone's shadow." Nathan grabbed her arm, almost pleading, "Please, just listen. I don't want to lose you." But Sophie yanked free, her eyes fierce even through her pain. "You already have." The door slammed shut, leaving Nathan frozen in the hallway. He pressed his forehead against the cold wood, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The old fear surged back. Years ago, Elena's betrayal had turned his heart to ice. But now, as Sophie walked away, the truth was revealed. The deepest wound wasn't betrayal. It was the terror of losing the only woman who had made him feel alive again. His voice cracked in a whisper, trembling in a way it never had before. "Don't leave me, Sophie." Inside, Sophie sank to the floor, her hands covering her face. She had spoken words meant to sever ties, but her chest ached unbearably. Because deep down, she knew the truth: she loved him more than she had ever dared admit. For days, Sophie avoided Nathan. She made excuses to attend meetings at the publishing house instead of going to Blackwood's headquarters, even changed her schedule just to avoid bumping into him in the elevator. But no matter how hard she tried, the image of him and Elena clung to her mind like a shadow, stabbing her chest with pain every time it resurfaced. That evening, Sophie sat in her apartment, a book open in her lap, though she hadn't read a single page. Outside, the wind whistled through the hallway, sometimes carrying the fading echo of footsteps. She thought of Nathan, then forced herself to push the thought away. Number. He had let Elena hug and kiss him right in front of her. That was not someone she could ever trust, but her heart didn't listen. Near midnight, Sophie had just turned off the lights and was about to crawl into bed when she heard an odd sound at her door. At first she tensed, thinking it was a stranger, but when she pressed her ear to the wood, a low, hoarse voice reached her. "Sophie, open the door!" Her heart jumped. Sophie stayed silent, clutching her pillow, sinking to the floor. Nathan's voice came again, lower this time, rough with a strain that sounded like someone swallowing their pride. "If you don't want to see me, I'll sit here all night." Sophie bit her lip, torn between fury and something else entirely. She waited, convinced he would give up. But when the clock struck 1 in the morning, the faint sound outside still hadn't gone away. Hesitantly, she cracked the door open. A weak yellow light from the hallway spilled inside. Nathan sat leaning against the wall, his shirt rumpled, tie gone, hair slightly messy. In his hands was a small paper box. "What are you doing?" Sophie whispered, part angry, part unsettled. "Waiting for you," Nathan answered simply. He held up the box. "Tart. Your favorite. I had to drive to 3 different stores to get it." Sophie's eyes widened. For a split second, she almost laughed. The cold, powerful CEO, the man who made entire financial circles tremble, sitting outside her door with a box of tarts like a schoolboy begging forgiveness. "You think a pastry's enough to make me forgive you?" She raised a brow, trying to keep her pride intact. Nathan's gaze locked with hers, his voice low, each word carving into the air. "No, but at least it shows I tried. Sophie, I can't quit you. You're the most dangerous habit I've ever had." Her chest tightened. The words pierced right through the defenses she had been building. She wanted to look away, to say she didn't care, but her lips trembled. "You really know how to say the right thing when it matters." She opened the door wider, though she kept her distance. "I'm not sure I believe you." Nathan nodded, patient. "I don't expect you to believe me right away, but I'll prove it. I don't care how long it takes. I just need you to know that between Elaine and me, there is nothing left. The only person I want to hold on to is you." Silence stretched, broken only by the frantic beat of Sophie's heart. She turned away, hiding her tear-bright eyes. "Come in, but don't think this means I've forgiven you." Nathan rose and stepped inside, setting the tart box on the table. He didn't touch her, only stood there, his gaze softened, yet still burning. Sophie sat down, opened the box, and took a small bite. Sweetness spread across her tongue, though it wasn't half as dizzying as the storm of emotions inside her chest. She didn't know if she could forgive him yet, but she knew one thing for certain. Nathan's confession had cracked open the wall she had built, and through that fracture, something dangerous but sweet was seeping in, something she could no longer keep out. The news broke on a Monday morning. Sophie had barely stepped into the publishing house when she felt the weight of whispers surrounding her. A colleague quietly placed the morning paper on her desk. Splashed across the front page, the bold headline screamed, "Editor Sophie Turner advances her career through romantic ties with CEO Blackwood." Beneath it was a blurry photo of Sophie and Nathan leaving a restaurant together. Her face flushed, his hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on her. Sophie's blood boiled. She could handle criticism, but having all her hard work erased and being portrayed as someone who climbed to the top by connections burned her pride to ashes. A crisis meeting was called. The publishing board shifted uncomfortably, some shareholders looking at her with thinly veiled suspicion. Sophie sat tall, her voice clear and resolute. "You have every right to doubt me, but I'll prove myself with results. The series I'm leading will answer on my behalf." And so she threw herself into the work. That night, her apartment lights stayed on until dawn as Sophie pored over every line, editing with painstaking care. She worked closely with Julian Hart, polishing his manuscript until it gleamed. She skipped meals, forgot sleep, driven only by one unshakable conviction. This was the only way to reclaim her honor. Nathan knocked on her door more than once, insisting he wanted to defend her publicly. But Sophie stood firm. "I don't need you to speak for me. This is my battle." And she was right. When the book launched, the response was explosive. Within a week, sales shattered every projection, topping bestseller charts. Readers praised it, critics lauded its sharp, thoughtful editing. The name Sophie Turner filled industry magazines not as the CEO's girlfriend, but as an editor of remarkable talent. Yet the scandal refused to die down. The press demanded a statement not from Sophie, but from Nathan Blackwood himself. That chance came at the project's press conference. Backstage, Sophie's heart pounded. She knew Nathan would take the stage. She feared he might say something that would unravel everything she had fought for. But when Nathan stepped under the lights, his sharp features illuminated, the unexpected happened. "There are rumors that Sophie Turner advanced her career because of a personal relationship with me," Nathan began, his gaze sweeping over the sea of flashing cameras. "Let me be clear. Sophie doesn't need me to shine. Her talent, determination, and brilliance are what made this project a resounding success. If anyone here is dependent on anyone else—" He paused, his eyes locking straight into the cameras, his voice deep and unwavering. "Then it's me who cannot live without her." For a moment, the entire hall froze. Then chaos erupted, shutters firing, reporters buzzing. Backstage, Sophie trembled. His words weren't just vindication. They were a confession, one that tore down the last of his icy armor. Nathan Blackwood, the untouchable CEO, had declared before the world that he needed her. Questions hurled from every direction, but Nathan ended it with a single, unflinching statement. "I take full responsibility for what I've said. And I'll prove it not with rumors, but with action." When the conference ended, Sophie stepped backstage. Nathan was waiting. His gaze was still dark, but softened now, stripped bare of pretense. Her lips quivered, her throat tight. She wanted to scold him for putting her in an awkward position. She wanted to cry from the sheer relief of being defended. Nathan moved closer, his voice low. "I'm not good at apologies, but today I said everything before the world. Sophie, do you believe me now?" Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She didn't speak, but the look she gave him, the trembling, luminous light in her gaze, was more powerful than any words. Thank you for being part of Soul Stories. If you're listening on another channel, come back to the official home so you can continue our love journeys together with the Soul Stories family. The grand ballroom of the five-star hotel shimmered beneath glittering chandeliers. Tonight, Blackwood Corporation was hosting a lavish celebration for the stunning success of their newly released book series. In just a few short weeks, it had climbed the charts to become a national bestseller, an industry phenomenon. Sophie stood quietly at one corner, a glass of red wine in hand. Jazz music floated through the air, mingling with polite chatter. She forced a polite smile, still unused to the attention, still unaccustomed to curious glances tinged with admiration. Everyone wanted to congratulate the brilliant editor behind the success. But deep down, Sophie felt uneasy. This was Nathan's event. What was he planning now? The host walked on stage to introduce Nathan Blackwood. The room hushed instantly. He appeared in a black tuxedo, tall and commanding, every step deliberate, his presence impossible to ignore. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nathan's deep voice resonated through the microphone, "tonight, we're here to celebrate a success. But it didn't come from me, nor from Blackwood Corporation. It came from one person." He paused, eyes scanning the crowd before locking firmly on Sophie. "One who worked tirelessly. One who poured every ounce of faith and talent into turning this book into a phenomenon. Without her, we would have nothing to celebrate tonight." The audience buzzed. Heads turned, searching for the person he spoke of. Nathan lifted his hand, pointing directly at her. "Please welcome Sophie Turner." Sophie froze. Applause erupted, urging her forward. Her heart raced wildly, but under Nathan's steady gaze, she couldn't retreat. Biting her lip, she made her way onto the stage. Nathan clasped her hand firmly. She tried to pull away, but his grip held steady, his dark eyes stealing her breath. Facing the crowd, He offered a rare smile, the faintest curve of the cold CEO's lips. Many of you may have heard the rumor that her success was tied to a personal relationship with me. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Sophie stiffened, but Nathan squeezed her hand lightly, signaling her to stay calm. That rumor is entirely false. The truth is, he drew a breath, his voice lowering, resonant. She doesn't need me to shine. It is I who cannot live without her. The hall fell silent. Then the flashes came, cameras exploding like fireworks. Nathan turned to Sophie, his gaze unwavering. That kiss back then, his voice dropped into a deep timbre. I only meant to silence you. But from that moment on, I've never stopped searching for your lips. Sophie's heart nearly burst. She gasped, but before she could respond, Nathan pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It was no impulsive gesture, no reckless whim. It was deep, consuming, in public, a declaration that Nathan Blackwood loved Sophie Turner. She trembled, stunned at first, then slowly let her eyes fall shut, surrendering to him. Every wound, every doubt, every misunderstanding melted away, leaving only the burning sweetness of his kiss and the frantic rhythm of her heart. When he finally pulled back, applause thundered through the hall. Nathan kept his arm around her waist, leaning close to murmur in her ear. Sophie, you don't have to answer me now. Just know this, I'm not hiding anymore. Her cheeks flushed crimson, but her lips curved into a soft, genuine smile the first time she allowed herself to admit what she felt. You're insane, but maybe I am too. The ballroom erupted with cheers. Cameras flashed wildly, immortalizing the moment destined to be remembered as the fateful kiss that defined both Nathan Blackwood and Sophie Turner. 1 year later, a gentle spring morning spilled sunlight through the tall windows. In the kitchen of the upscale apartment Sophie and Nathan now shared, the warm aroma of fresh pastry filled the air. Sophie wore a floral apron, her hair tied up, hands moving quickly as she kneaded dough. She chattered on as if her thoughts had no pause button. Did you know I read a study saying that having pastries in the morning makes you happier all day? So I think if we had tarts every morning, or maybe muffins or croissants, it would definitely boost our productivity by at least 20%. I was also thinking about trying French-style almond cake, but that would mean we need almond flour. Do you know where to find good almond flour? Oh, speaking of almonds, I ran into Julie at the bookstore yesterday, and she said. In the living room, Nathan sat with a hardcover novel open in his hands. He turned the pages slowly, though his eyes barely skimmed the words. His focus was entirely on the sound drifting from the kitchen. Sophie's lively voice had become his favorite soundtrack. Over the past year, he had learned that her endless talking was the sweetest melody he could ever want to hear every single day. He set the book down and rose. In the kitchen, Sophie bent over to take a tray of pastries out of the oven, her face glowing in the haze of rising steam. Nathan stood behind her for a moment, watching, then wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. Nathan, you scared me. Sophie laughed, though her stream of chatter didn't stop. But do you smell the butter? I think I finally got the ratio right this time. Oh, do you have meetings today? If not, then maybe we could. Her words were cut off by a kiss. Nathan bent down, silencing her in the way he loved most, his lips pressing against hers, deep and lingering, leaving no room for another word. Sophie squirmed briefly, then melted into a giggle, her arms sliding up around his neck as she kissed him back willingly. The scent of warm pastry and coffee mingled with their heated breaths and pounding hearts, composing a private symphony for their morning. When he finally pulled back, Nathan rested his forehead against hers, his voice low and warm. I'm addicted to you, and for the rest of my life, I don't ever want to quit. Sophie's cheeks flushed pink, her eyes shining with happiness as she mock glared at him. You're hopeless. A heavy addict. Nathan chuckled, brushing a kiss over the tip of her nose. Yes, and I'll stay addicted to you forever. Sophie laughed outright, hugging him close, leaving the tray of steaming pastries forgotten on the counter. Her laughter filled the apartment, blending with the steady beat of his heart, simple yet rich, like their own morning melody. This was the happiness they had fought for through misunderstandings, anger, and fear. No grandeur, no show. Just a morning, a kiss, and a whispered promise enough to know their love was forever.